Hi, I'm Friedemann Findeisen. I'm a songwriting coach from Germany, and I'm here to answer your questions on songwriting.
Holistic songwriting.
Our first question is something we got sent by email. What's the most common mistake you see songwriters make? Well, I don't really believe in mistakes when it comes to songwriting. It is an art form, and therefore you should theoretically be able to do absolutely anything as long as you can kind of justify it and find a reason for it. There are certainly things that I keep hearing that bother me. So those would be nonsensical harmony, meaning the voice leading doesn't check out, the functionality of it doesn't really make sense. It's really just kind of there, just one weird chord followed by another weird chord. I hear that quite a lot. Avoid notes in the melodies. Whenever I hear that, I just cringe. Very, very hard to listen to sometimes. Another one would be odd, unsatisfying structure. So I wrote the book on this subject, The Addiction Formula, and obviously that's something that's going to bother me. But I'm really annoyed when a song is building up towards something and then doesn't deliver something satisfying at the end of that, or when it just delivers something that should be really satisfying but didn't build up to it properly. How do you overcome writer's block or creative slumps? First of all, I think we have to make a distinction here because a lot of people throw these really big words all together, but there's really a lot of distinctions here. So let's get to my definitions. Personally, I call a writer's block a block that affects the writer as a whole, meaning you have trouble writing absolutely anything. Like whenever you sit down to write, nothing comes. It doesn't matter what you write, you're struggling to be creative. So it's a large issue. This usually depends on some psychological issues, on possibly a phase of your life that you're going through. These are really deep-seated issues, and I don't think I should address those. So writer's block really isn't for me to discuss. Next, we have the creative slump, which is something that's more seasonal. So something that usually passes, where we're just not really excited to work. Like we can sit down, we can write something, but we're not really feeling it. All of the songs tend to sound a little bit alike. And there's three ways that I like to get out of this. The first one is to learn something new. That's what we do at Holistic Songwriting, is to teach you all of these different methods to help you get excited about the art of music again. So for me, I just like to go on YouTube, get inspired, listen to some music, some really great music, check out people who run songwriting awards. Sometimes it's a great way to find artists who are doing really interesting things and just listen to them to get inspired, to get a sense of like, oh, you can do that? I didn't know you could do that. That's a cool way of breaking those rules. Maybe I could write something like that. Which brings me to the second point, which is excitement. Finding ways to build more excitement into your songwriting routine. So this might involve going to songwriting camps, changing of scenery. So maybe instead of writing at home in a room that doesn't really inspire you, you go outside, you go on a walk, buying a new instrument, something that inspires you, or just finding different people that you could write with. And finally, it would be to connect with what got you excited about songwriting in the first place. Usually we all have a reason why we make music, and it's important. Sometimes we forget about it along the way, but it's important sometimes to refocus on what that was and what got us excited about being able to create songs in the first place. So that's writer's block and creative slump. And I think there's a third one that's not even appearing on most people's radar, which I call the song block. When you are writing on a specific song and you're really struggling finishing this particular song. Like you could start something else, but you really would rather finish this one song. It's really important to understand this distinction because, as you can see, the solutions are seated in very different areas of your life. But there's two things you can do. Number one is a very logical, theoretical approach, where you really sit down with your track and you think about what's wrong with this track, what is not working, what are the big issues in my track that are holding me back from getting excited about it. Which areas, like which sections could I possibly rewrite or change? And the other big thing that you can do is the idea of quantity. Instead of trying to fix it specifically by really thinking about what it is, you just rewrite it like a bunch of times. Say, okay, this pre-chorus isn't working. Okay, I don't really know what's wrong with it. But instead of really trying to figure out what the issue is and solving it step by step in a very theoretical approach, you could also just say, I'm going to write 5 pre-choruses that would fit here. And then I'm going to pick the best one. That's another really great approach for this sort of thing. What's the key to writing lyrics that connect emotionally? For me, that would be sensory writing, and specifically visual writing. So often when we are communicating our thoughts in lyrics, we use very abstract language. We use big words that don't really mean anything, like love or hurt. These are words that mean, or they mean so much rather, that it's hard to kind of pin down for a listener what you specifically mean by it. Do you mean physical pain? Are you talking about emotional pain? Intellectual pain? Are we talking about the pain of making a joke and nobody laughing, right? There are so many different kinds of pain. And by using these abstract words, we're really kind of robbing the listener of any visual indicators. And so it's better to be specific with your nouns, find verbs that suggest movement, and with every line really, try to be as cinematic, as visual as you possibly can. And I think that's what ultimately connects the best with listeners. How do you know when a song is truly finished? So I think there is a general issue with a definition here for a lot of people, and I think that's what's holding people back, and it makes them not finish their songs, because their definition of what it means for a song to be finished, they almost never achieve this goal. And so their definition is something like, a song is finished when I can't think of anything that I could improve about it. And this is really problematic because as artists, we often evolve quite a bit. We learn new stuff. We are interested in different things. We come to a session, we have a song, we come back to that song in the second session, and we have 10 new ideas of what we could put inside of it. And so we start cramming all of these ideas into it. Our song starts mutating, in all directions. Next time we have like a bunch of new ideas. We just learned about this new cool chord progression. We want to put that in there as well. Ooh, and a little bit of sound design would be cool. And I got this lyrical idea, we could do that. And this whole thing just kind of starts growing in all directions. It gets this really unwieldy thing that nobody really wants to listen to. That's kind of impossible to parse when you listen to it for the first time. The better definition is seeing a song not as your diary, capturing your entire personality, but seeing it as a single diary entry. So this is why I hammer on so much about you should finish your song, like have a first version of your song on day one, because every day you're going to change. You're going to have a different personality every day. So finish your song on day one, and then the rest of the days when you're working on this track, you just look at, okay, how was I feeling that day? Who was I on this particular day? What does this specific diary entry look like? And how can I make it more clear and more impactful? A better definition for a finished song would be something like, a song is finished once its emotional message is as clear and as impactful as it can be. So this is a better definition because it says, a song has one message, it has one purpose, and your goal is not to make it grow in all directions, but to figure out what this one thing, this one message that you're trying to get across is, and how to make that as impactful and as clear as possible. What should a songwriter focus on first? Melody, lyrics, or chords? Now, I think the great thing about this question is that there is no correct answer. There are no rules as to what element you start with. You can start with melody, you can start with lyrics, you can start with chords, you can start with a bass riff, you can start with a sound, you can start with a mixing technique, you can start with the drum beat, you can start with the backing vocals, you can start with any section you like. You can start at the intro, the verse, you can start with the chorus, even the bridge, you can start with the outro, you can start with absolutely anything from the guitar solo. Absolutely anything is permitted. And that's one of the most beautiful things about songwriting, is that because process is so directly tied to what your song will sound like at the end, having these different processes at hand and being able to use all of those is going to lead you to vastly different songs. Now, I have this idea of what I call a centerpiece, meaning whatever you start your song with is probably going to take up more space than the other elements of your song, and is therefore going to become a very important element of your song. Say, for example, I start a song by playing a bass riff. When it's done, it's going to be pretty full. There's going to be a lot of det notes, a lot of details to this one riff. So when I now introduce another instrument, say the drums have to kind of rein it in a little bit, right? There's a lot of detail in the bass already. The drums don't want to kill that by adding a lot of details themselves. So they have to act as a sort of support for the bass. What that means in practice is, at the end of your song, you will have a song that has a really strong bass riff. And that's going to be the standout thing, the centerpiece about your song. So what's great about this realization is that you can start with the thing that you want to stand out in your song at the end. Meaning, if you want to focus on a great vocal melody in an awesome chorus, start with the chorus and start with the vocal melody. If you are more interested in writing something that carries a lot of meaning with beautiful lyrics, then I think you should start with the lyrics. And if you want something that has a great bass riff, start with the bass riff. How important is it to know music theory when writing songs? First of all, I should say, you can write great songs without music theory. I have a bunch of friends who are hit songwriters. The Beatles famously didn't know music theory, although I think that's kind of a myth. I think Paul McCartney knew a little bit about the Nashville system, right? A lot of writers out there don't know about music theory and can still produce amazing sounding music. So why would you want to learn music theory? Personally, I'm a music theory nerd and I love it. For the first couple of years of my writing career, I didn't, and I got by just fine. But one thing I was kind of missing was variety. My songs kind of all sounded a little bit samey because I was falling into the same kind of ideas over and over again. And I didn't really know what those ideas were because I had no way of analyzing my music. You know, switch the key and all of a sudden the chords are all different. I feel like that should sound different, but really I'm using the same chord progression without me knowing. So having music theory is already a great way to achieve more variety in your writing. It's a great idea giver. Like, oh, you know, I need to express this specific emotion. What's a great chord for that? What's a great scale for that I could use? That's really, really incredibly useful. It's a great way to learn from other musicians. So when you hear something in a piece of music, you can say, oh, okay, I can hear that that's a minor sixth chord. So, that's what that can sound like. That's awesome. I didn't think it could sound like that. And you can put that in your repertoire. Music theory can train your ears to come up with different approaches on the spot because you know, like, okay, this time I'm going to try arpeggio kind of approach. Next time I'm going to something more scalier, now a one-note melody. Now something where I start on the 9 or the 11 or the 13, or now I'm going to do something where I work with a lot of tension and release. And these are just melodic approaches. You could obviously go for rhythmic approaches. Well, there's so many things. That's the great thing about music theory. It gives you a never-ending stream of ideas on how to approach a given choice that you have to make in your songwriting. And finally, what are your top 3 tips for improving songwriting skills? Okay, I think the first one is going to be not to focus too much on music theory, but to focus rather on songwriting theory. Being able to write a good bass line to a drum groove or vice versa, making sure all of your instruments in the mix sound good together, making sure that you're telling a consistent story both musically and lyrically in your song, things like that. Those I think are incredibly important. Now this is what we've created all of these courses on at Holistic Songwriting. So definitely do check those out. We're very proud of them. There's a lot of really important stuff that I think songwriters need to hear. But that's really the first one, is focusing on songwriting theory rather than music theory. Music theory, very useful, but not something I would put amongst the top 3 tips for songwriters. Secondly would be ear training. I think this is really the unsung hero of songwriting in particular. Is if you have good trained ears, you're so much better at figuring out different ideas over a chord progression or coming up with more interesting chords to the same melody. If you just find one chord progression for a melody that you had in your head, it's just that. It's just one chord progression. But if you can think of 5 or 6 or 20 different chord progressions, now you can pick and choose. You can say like, oh, I like the first 2 chords from this, and I like chord number 3 from that, and chord number 4 from that. You can kind of put it together and make something that's completely unique to you. It's going to help you figure out what your voice is as a writer. It's going to help you become a more musical artist. And finally, it's to learn an instrument. There's a lot of DJ producer type songwriters out there these days, and I think it really is incredibly beneficial for them to learn how to sing and how to play one harmony instrument, i.e. guitar or piano, usually speaking. And if you already do those, learn how to operate a DAW, or learn how to produce a little bit yourself. Those tend to be like your 3 most important instruments. If you can, also learn the drums, also learn the bass, maybe a stringed instrument, maybe a woodwind or a brass instrument. That all is going to be massively useful when it comes to writing music. And that's it for our questions today. If you have any questions yourself, please let me know in the usual way by taking out a piece of paper and a quill and writing a letter to this address right here. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Friedemann Findeisen from Holistic Songwriting. Take care and stay gefährlich.